As many of you know, we're coming up on Pesach, aka Passover, as I said, next week. I really wanted JCAN, the Jewish Climate Action Network of Massachusetts, to make this year a climate justice Pesach. And anyone who knows the basic outlines of the story can see why. As we discussed in a presentation last week, in one way, it can be read as the consequence to an empire system of resource distribution. And the answer, perhaps, is that the best way to do resource distribution is at the community level, not at the empire. But in another very obvious way, Passover is the story of people being exploited for the benefit of others. I think it's just as obvious that we are seeing a version of that right now. I was so excited that we could get Gerry McGovern to speak during this time because his book, 99th Day, A Warning About Technology, talks about exploitation, talks about the harms to our numerous environments and ecosystems, but it really focuses on the role that technology and the false confidence that's been sold with it plays in our modern iteration of an all too familiar story. It's sold to us as energy, but also now comes to encompass some novel and terrifying psychological threats. As we listen to Gerry's presentation, I hope you can reflect on the ways in which the unnamed pharaohs of Egypt are similar to today's tech bros and other masters of the universe. Gerry McGovern has spent most of his career focused on reducing data waste, particularly with his method Top Tasks, and has published 9 books. His 2020 book, Worldwide Waste: How Digital is Killing the Planet and What to Do About It, focused on reducing digital waste. His critiques of the green transition and techno-optimism in general have earned him some accusations of being a Trojan horse for the fossil fuel industry. If that is the case, the public relations geniuses at Big Energy may want to rethink their strategies, since he is just as critical of fossil fuels as he is renewable energy. So with that, thanks for joining us, Gerry, and please take it away.
Thank you very much, Deborah. So hopefully, there'll be lots of questions and lots of discussion. I'm just going to give a bit of a history of how I got to where I am. So back in the early 90s, I was, one of these struggling poor writers trying to publish fiction and also making a little bit of a living through freelance journalism, mainly alternative music, but also a little bit in technology space, because it was something I had a long-term interest in. And I was doing an article for a magazine about it was a union magazine for journalists on what sources they were using, what particularly systems they were using to do their research. And somebody said to me, "Oh, you should really check out this thing called the World Wide Web." So this was about 93 or so. And first time I looked at the web, I thought, wow, this is going to change the world. And I thought to myself, well, this is something you could really get involved in, because you're kind of drifting at the moment and you don't have much focus. And at that stage, I had 2 young kids as well. So I decided I'd absolutely focus from then on the web. And so it happened that I'd interviewed an executive in this Irish agency called the National Software Directorate a couple of weeks earlier, or just generally what they were doing to promote software development. And I decided to send them a letter, because I didn't have an email at that stage. And I said, you should really do something about this thing called the web. But I kind of couched it because at that stage there was a huge, big trend for CD-ROMs. That was going to be the thing that was really going to change the world. So I said, you should do something on the CD-ROM industry and also something on this thing called the web. So anyway, he got back to me and says, yeah, we should do a report on that. And then we'd have a meeting every 2 or 3 months. And every 2 or 3 months, he'd say, well, focus less on the CD-ROM and let's focus more on this, because it was just growing and growing and growing. So eventually, in 1996, I published this report, Ireland, the Digital Age, the Internet, super optimistic about the future. And at that stage, I'd also co-founded a company called NUA, which is the Irish word for new. And in June of that year, I think June or July, the European Union gave us their top prize for internet innovation, the most innovative company in Europe for the web and stuff like that. So I was there early on, and went to Javits Center in New York for the huge web conferences, and all over the place. Since then, 40 countries, I'd say, or more, worked with a lot of the large organizations from Cisco, Microsoft, IBM. Oh, I'd say most of the US government at different stages, and their departments focused on web content, data management, all that sort of stuff, and went through the whole dot-com bust and boom, developed search software in the late 90s, social media stuff, saw it all, and got burnt and turned around many times by it, but generally was an evangelist for technology and the internet, and totally believed in the ethereal nature of digital, and don't print this email and all that sort of stuff, that in essence this digital thing was a kind of guilt-free and environmentally positive. Then around 2017, I'd had a good career, and made a good bit of money, and didn't need to work as much anymore, and I thought I'd maybe focus a bit more on doing better and good things. And I had a certain interest in the environment, but I came across Greta Thunberg, who I found tremendously inspiring, and her generation of trying to do something to raise these issues about climate change. So I said, let's focus over here in digital a bit and see, can I find anything that I might be able to help improve digital, become even more sustainable, because my de facto belief system was that digital was inherently sustainable, and that it was green and clean and all those sorts of things. So I started doing some research, and basically the more I researched and the more I looked, the more worried I became, even though I'd come across some of these things earlier on, but I'd kind of pushed them into the back of my head. And I started reading about the history of Silicon Valley and the whole, where did it come from and everything like that. And I discovered that, that it was basically building chips, and also, helping the refinement of digital technologies. But basically it was in the early 50s, it was chip production. But that there was this deliberate marketing decision that they would create a new industry that would not be like the smokestack, the old industries of the past. And that they would do things like put their chemical containers and storage systems underground, because to make a chip requires about 400 chemicals. It's very, very chemical intense. So they had this sense that we'll no longer have factories. We won't call these things factories. We'll actually call them campuses, after the whole university thing. So I was thinking, wow, this sounds like propaganda. This sounds like greenwashing. This is the ethereal. They had this deliberate. I mean, the cloud didn't get there by accident. This sort of language, as what I learned, there was a deliberate, systematic propagandizing of the technology industry to make it feel and seem an awful lot greener than it actually was. And the original planners, they didn't want as they described them, the dirty old workers of the other factories. They wanted new executives and marketers and branders and engineers. But of course, you can't make chips, or you certainly could with engineers, but you need an awful lot of them, and they'd be very expensive chips. So instead, they were making all these chips with Mexican women basically, and women from the Philippines who they were classically exploiting, as is the basic foundation of so much of everything we seem to have do and done. We find really poor people, and we destroy their health because they were in these clean rooms, etc. So there was massive exploitation of Filipino and Mexican women who were, got multiple cancers or whatever, but were able to get rid of quite easily because they were not important. They were just Mexican women and Filipino women. So again, you discover, what was all this industry based on? And very rapidly as well, the Silicon Valley area became the most toxic place in the United States, with by far the most toxic dumps, etc. So by the mid 70s, they decided, well, we can't keep poisoning California. Let's find some other places that we can poison around the world that we won't, it won't be noticed as well. So they shifted a lot of the tech industry or the chip manufacturing industry out of the US. Anyway, this story I began to see, well, this is not quite the story I had expected to find. And at one stage, I came across e-waste as well, which is basically the results are old computers and the old screens, etc. And I found that, we don't recycle this stuff, and we never have. We just dump it in poor countries. We dump it in India or in Pakistan or in Ghana or the Philippines or Malaysia for quite a period. A lot of it went to China. And I discovered basically that we recycle even today about 5% of e-waste. So officially, it's about 20%, they say, according to the United Nations. But that hides the fact that the actual recycling process only gets back about 30% of reusable materials. So 30% of 20% is about 5. So the actual stuff that we can get out of e-waste that we can reuse again in the manufacturing process is about 5%. And the other 95% of it, which is usually very nasty stuff, is dumped in rivers and soils. But it's fine. It's okay. We don't dump it in the USA so much or in Europe so much. We just dump it in those poor countries around the world. But even that is becoming a problem because we're dumping so much that it's getting into the seas and the fish are getting lots of it. So those nice fishes that you're eating probably contain little bits of the iPhone you threw away 10 years ago. But probably just tiny little bits. Hasn't really built up to the stage where it'll start killing us in the millions yet. That's to come down the road. So I was talking to this wonderful scientist about e-waste called Josh Lebowski, a Canadian scientist, and he had done a lot of work on e-waste. But he told me, he says, if you really want to understand the impact of waste. Yes, e-waste is important, but for every ton of e-waste, there's 1,000 ton of mining waste. And mining waste is where the real damage is occurring. That is a totally hidden story. And, we cannot build this technological world without, huge use of materials. So that started a journey. Initially, I was quite annoyed. He said that to me because I was really focused on e-waste. I said, "Oh, what's this bloody thing about this other waste? It seems like so boring, etc." And it is. I guarantee it's extremely boring type of stuff. But just before coming on here, I saw this joke on Mastodon. I had this picture of this huge hole in the ground that was caused by mining, and beside it were these wind turbines, and the guy was saying, ha 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 ha, ha. Look, they're complaining about wind turbines, but look at these holes in the ground. They're 100 times worse than the wind turbines. And I thought it was, how stupid and short-sighted people are. The hole in the ground, in all likelihood, is for copper. It looked like a copper mine to me. And this is what these wind turbines are built out of. They are built out of copper. They are built out of steel. The hole in the ground is there to build these wind turbines and to build other parts of our. But the image that we're selling the world is these wind turbines floated down from heaven. We don't even call them factories, which they are. They're extractive factories. We call them farms, as if the wind turbines have sex in the autumn and then get pregnant, and then in the spring there's these little baby wind turbines that are born that frolic around the landscape and like lambs, and then grow up to be big wind turbines, and it's also ecological and etc. in the process. But anyway, I started looking at waste. Whoa, waste. So I was talking about copper there. So we are said, and I found a number of researchers who have said that we need more copper in the next, some say 18 years, some say 25 years, but who's arguing? Let's say 25 years. We need more copper in the next 25 years than we have mined in the previous 7,000 years. So that's a lot of copper in 25 years. Why do we need copper? Because copper is part of the clean, green, wonderful revolution, this green transition for ethereal, renewable energy, right? So copper, 700,000 tons of copper, roughly, in the last 10,000 years have we mined. So the same again, almost 1 billion tons of copper is required, which is an enormous quantity. So let me give you the scale of that, because this is where waste comes into play. We have no sense of the actual waste that's created in mining. So back in 1900, if you mined 1 ton of copper, you would probably create about 25 tons of waste, because basically there's very few, or it's very rare that you will find in an ore body 100% of a particular metal. It's usually in percentages. So back around 1900 was about 4%. 4%. An average ore body was about 4% of actual copper. So to get 1 ton of copper, you would create about 25 tons of waste. But that's not the only story of waste, because there's another part of waste which is called the strip ratio. And what that is the amount of soil and rock you have to take away to actually get to the ore. So there's usually these things that's called strip ratios. And the average one for copper is about 3 to 1 in the process. So basically, the total impact on the earth for that 1 ton of copper is about 25 multiplied by 3. Somewhere in that territory. So maybe about 75 tons of impact on the earth. Some of it quite significant with various different pollutants, etc. All of it very significant. Anywhere where that is, you've destroyed. That's the end of that place. You've destroyed the water table, etc. for 10,000, maybe 20,000 years. But it doesn't stop there, because what happens is all ore qualities decline over time, because we find the best ores and we mine those, and then we go for lower ore qualities because the best ones have been got. By 2020, the ore quality ratio for copper had reduced to about half of 1%. So 1 ton of copper in 2020 is about 180 tons. And it's not like the waste of 1900 either, as well, which was damaging, but not quite damaging. This one is much more chemically impacted because the copper is much more spread and you need much more chemicals to sift it and to take it out of the ore body. So that's about 180 multiplied by 3, the strip ratio as well. So you're talking about 1 ton of copper is about 500, over 500 tons of waste, varying different types of waste, some of it extremely toxic. So I did some rough calculations and I estimated that to get to our 700 million tons of copper for the next 25 years, we will need to create about 3 Mount Everests of waste. So Mount Everest is about 175 billion tons. So that's just for copper. That's just one of the so-called green metals to build our electrical infrastructure. Copper is essential for all electrical infrastructure, essential in data centers, essential in NVIDIA chips and architectures, etc. So that's just one. So when you add copper together and all the other metals, etc., we are fast approaching a point where we are mining a Mount Everest every year or creating a Mount Everest of waste every year. And if you think we can survive that as a species, well, you're much more optimistic than I am. Unfortunately, Deborah was saying, and we will look, and I'll open up after this statement to questions and comments. I've spent 5-6 years talking to a lot of scientists and reading a lot of research reports, and most of them are that I haven't found an optimistic scientist in 5 years of it. Now I'm sure they're there, but practically everybody that I talk to sees an incredible both environmental and civilizational collapse coming before the end of this century, and the predictions are from that human population will collapse either to 1 billion or to perhaps as low as 100 million. That we have become absolute devourers of our environment, and with things like artificial intelligence, we're just accelerating the harms even faster and faster and faster. Instead of slowing down, we are absolutely putting the boot to the accelerator. Since 1970, we have done 3 times more damage to this beautiful planet of ours than in the previous 200,000 years. Now, that's very, very difficult to understand that. That almost comes back in my head almost every day. Yeah, in 50 years, we have done 3 times more damage than we did in the previous 200,000 years. And with stuff like AI, it's just accelerating that incredible harm. So I think our role now, what I would see, my role is trying my best to some degree to be a good ancestor, to look after what soil I can, what air I can, what water I can, so that there's something left, that we don't destroy every single piece of life on this planet in our kind of crazed final rush of consumption. So with there, I will, leave it for the moment and open it up for questions.
So that was kind of a lot. So perhaps everyone wants to take a breath, take a moment, and I'm going to ask the most important question I have. And while I'm doing that, while Gerry's answering, if you have questions, if you want to raise your hands, please do that. So our organization's name is Jewish Climate Action Network. So what actions can we take? I tend to shy away from things that I can do individually. Not that I don't think that I should do them, but I don't want to push those as being like the answer. But if that's all we've got, you know, what can we do?
Yeah, well, I think, it is the only area left that can, in my opinion, do active, genuine changes at a community level. Uh, and because everything else is just bought. All our governments are bought, all our companies are bought. They are, and even if the politicians wanted to make change, we live in a growth debt cult. So the only area for agency, I think, that has any hope is at a community level, and it's fairly basic. Stand with the soil, stand with the forest, stand with the water, protect the soil, protect the forests, protect the air as much as you can. You know, don't let all of it be destroyed, because an awful lot of it is being destroyed, and an awful lot more. We are entering, I think, a frenzy of destruction. I've read a lot about as well empires and civilizations, and the vast majority of civilizations destroy each other. A French philosopher once said, before civilizations are forests and after them are deserts. Civilizations destroy themselves. Ultimately, there's hardly a civilization that hasn't destroyed its environment, and imperialism just allowed civilizations to go on a bit longer, because now the USA destroys Latin America or destroys Africa, and sucks it dry, so that it can keep looking like it's a great place for another 20 or 50 years. But sooner or later, so much squeeze will be on. So I think we can protect what we can, stand with the forests, stand with the soil, stand with the water, if we want to leave something after us. But at a community level is obviously much, much more effective than at an individual level.
Okay, I like that, and also maybe protecting the indigenous, who are still among us. And shockingly, in Massachusetts, we do still have something of an indigenous population. So I wanted
Absolutely.
to read what Mag said in the chat, thinking also of two other critical elements, lithium and silicon. Both are so finite, both are such wasteful and devastating extraction processes. How can we help to make people realize the devastation their tech needs are bringing?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been trying to do for years. I mean, we are wiping out the Andes for lithium, and many other places. It's 30 major communities in the Andes will probably be gone in the next 50 years, because of this race for lithium. And it's so different, because this is a green metal. This is our, and like, every day I don't Maston is the only community or social media community I use now, but every day you're just bombarded with these stories of pictures of wind turbines and these beautiful solar panels. And so these solar panels are being made by Uyghur slaves. There's the blood, sweat, and tears. We're cutting down 14,000 football fields, or China is cutting down 14,000 football fields worth of wood in Myanmar every year, just for the charcoal, for the silicon smelting process, just for the charcoal for the silicon smelting process. It's just this impression that silicon is just sand, or just, yeah, but it has to go through an extraordinary process to turn it into high quality, silicon that can be used either in solar panels, etc. So these ideas that these things are, impact free, or that there's any sort of transition happening. We've never cut more wood. We've never cut and burned more wood. We've never mined more coal. We've never mined more coal. We have never mined more oil and gas. There are booms in all these sectors, and there's an uncontacted tribe in Indonesia, kind of absolutely beautiful tribe, that when a baby is born in they're called the Hongana Manyawa. When a baby is born, they plant they bury the umbilical cord with a seed of a tree, and the tree grows with the child, and they try and avoid cutting down trees entirely. They just live off wood that has fallen. They have this extraordinary reverence for the forest, and they are being destroyed on one side by nickel mining. Nickel mining is, in a nickel, another green metal in the process. And then on the other side, by a coal mining boom. And one of the core reasons there's a coal mining boom is Indonesia needs the coal to process the nickel ore in the process. So on both sides, their forest is being destroyed, but they're being told there's a green transition going on. So not alone is it for them not a green transition, it's an acceleration, and that's happening in so many areas. They say China, and China is an extraordinary civilization and amazing, but China burns more coal every year than all the world put together. China's opening up 6 times more coal plants every year than all the rest of the world put together. But China, according to Greenpeace, China is this heaven of green and green transition. So it's all this craziness, that anything to avoid the truth of where we are and what's causing, why are we going extinct, why are we wiping out everything? Because it's a consumption problem. We consume vastly too much of materials, and we create vastly too much waste, and the vast majority of that waste is now toxic. 150 years ago, the vast majority of waste we created could go back into the land and it could regenerate stuff. The vast majority of the waste we create today is destructive of life in the process. So it's, but how to bring attention to these things, I don't know. I write articles, I write books, but it seems nobody wants to listen. And the Greens are often the very worst people, or a certain type of the green establishment are the very worst people in promoting these worst practices, which is just an extraordinary tragedy.
Okay, so you used an analogy that you talked about the deck of cards, like the climate change or ecological deck of cards, and you noted that carbon dioxide is just one of the cards. And maybe it's like the ace of spades or something, like a really important one, but we're focusing on that, and we're not focusing on the rest of the deck, the other 51 cards. And so can you speak to a little bit of how we got to this moment where it's all CO2 this, CO2 that, and oh, by the way, did you see that I just extinguished like an entire bird species? Yeah, but CO2. Like, if you could speak to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a classic human trait, of, create a bogeyman, or a kind of a thing, that a scapegoat, or whatever. And back in the early 70s, climate research considered that climate change had 2 specific drivers. They used to call it the 2 legs of climate change, and one of them was CO2, but the other was land use change. And they showed that often land use change had a more significant impact on climate than CO2, depending on the geographic region. But over the last 40 or 50 years, basically, it has just become CO2. And I think the reason why it has just become CO2 is because it's a kind of everybody's problem and nobody's problem. because we're not even reducing CO2. We're not, but it's a kind of we couldn't do it anyway, but if you're focused on land use change, well, that's my golf course, or that's the land I want to put the factory on, or build a road on, or the new or the new hotel in. So if you're actually saying, well, climate change is also driven by land use change, then it's much more focused because somebody owns that land or claims that land. So that was just part of the shift away, that we would find this singular thing that we're not doing anything about anyway, really, because it's still growing, but it becomes this amorphous, everybody's problem, nobody's problem. So a kind of marketing propaganda, a kind of so that we'll avoid the problem. But of course, climate change is just one of the things that's going wrong. We have soil collapse, which is driven by herbicides and pesticides and nitrogen, phosphorus overload. We have acidification of the oceans. We have the plastification of the oceans. We have the draining of the continents of fresh water. So this is what I mean by the other 52 cards, that by relentlessly, just focus on this thing over there, we often end up, doing even more harm to the other things, but because they're not the sexy thing, so it allows us to all the other damage and pretend that we're doing good in the process. So it's just like putting those chemical plants underground, because not alone, it kind of create the, well, we don't need chemicals to make our new things, but the chemical tanks, they leaked, because if you put chemical tanks underground, they're much more difficult to maintain, etc., etc. So they created even more destruction of the local environment for a marketing purpose in the process. So we're just at this stage, Deborah, of incredible dishonesty with ourselves. But I meet, people in different situations, and I try and avoid talking about these subjects, but I might be going to the dentist or something like that. And, and the dentist might, oh, what do you do? And I'd say, oh, I write. Oh, what do you write about? Like, I'm not trying to tell them. And, but typically when they find out what they do, typically their response is, we're going to destroy ourselves, aren't we? I think a lot of people know what we're doing, but they kind of admit it and don't want to admit it, but they still want the politicians to lie to them. They still want to believe the lie in the process, that we can keep living the way we live and that there won't be consequences. So maybe we can, the truth is in the back of our heads, and maybe we'll have a hallucination in large numbers, or a real truth moment, where we'll all suddenly, or a lot of us will suddenly really come to our senses. I don't know, but I think we should still, those of us who feel we can, should still resist and still keep presenting what we think is the truth, and what we think is actually happening.
So I wanted to pick up on something that you said initially and something that you said just now, talking about these campuses and the hidden labor, the hidden chemicals, the hidden toxicity, the hidden labor. And then I think the audience would be interested if you could talk about kind of what was really behind that, because when I read that section, I was like, oh, you mean like Thomas Jefferson and the slaves that he kept hidden. But there were some other bad actors in that story, if you could pick.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's we always try and outsource the harm. I mean, there is within the human nature the nagging conscience that says, I'm not really that bad, am I? So we try and push the negative things that we do out of sight, and then we retell the story, in the process that makes us look good. later we get our historians or philosophers. But we, often you know, the philosophers legitimize this sort of thinking in the process. And I think the actors that would have gone back much further than Silicon Valley and would have gone back as far as philosophers like, say, Descartes, who would have, stripped out of, before then there was a general thought among many peoples that, the river was alive, the soil was alive, the mountains were alive. So you're not going to pour acid in something that you think is alive. But if you strip all the agency out of those things and it's just a resource, the soil or the river, it's just water, then it's much easier to pour acid into those areas. And then, if it's all building up in the Silicon Valley area, you move to places like Taiwan or other places where the damage happens to their rivers, or the general movement in manufacturing out of the Silicon Valley, so that ultimately Apple talked about designed in Silicon Valley, but not made here, and that was part of the story as well that got me going, because I remember around 2017, Apple was really promoting aluminium as this incredibly green metal, and recycling and all that sort of stuff. So that was one of the metals that I did a lot of research on, and I discovered that aluminium comes from a soft rock called bauxite. And bauxite forms the perfect formation conditions for bauxite are under tropical forests. So to get the bauxite, you have to basically cut down the Amazon or the African tropical forest. So this thing that, and Apple had these campaigns saying Mother Nature and, calling itself Mother Nature and all those sorts of things, and or green and clean aluminium. So you're wiping out the Amazon to get your aluminium. And, you're thinking, and we're selling that as green and clean. So from so many angles, Deborah, you were finding just this, that everything had become branding. And, we were AI long before AI. We were, AI is the great big lying machine, that requires 10, 20 times more energy than the previous generation data centers, water and materials, etc. But, we were the great big lying machine long before AI. And I suppose maybe that's why we love AI so much, because it's a reflection of who we are, who we've become, just, a whole species that can do nothing but lie to ourselves about who we are and who we've become.
And I also want to note, it sounds like actual Nazis were involved in the creation of, the construct that of these campuses, and that was part of why we wanted to hide.
And you look at the basic core of the origins of Silicon Valley is chip design for rockets. So the core initial work was on rocket design. And, we know, of course, Werner von Braun and the Nazi were the most advanced rockets. So, the basic, there are books in Harvard University of Werner von Braun's, view of nature, but coffee table books of soft focus pictures of Werner at home and with his kids and everything like that. So, there was, the rocket design and that was the foundational, that was where Silicon Valley made its initial money, making rockets more accurate. And chip design for rockets. So there was lots of interaction with, Nazi scientists and that, because they were they were the leading rocket designers that the US took over en masse for the moon mission and other various missions. So yeah, another angle for sure.
It's just always good for us to keep an eye on the Nazis. But
Yeah.
Thea asks a question: do you think some major climate or environmental catastrophe will cause people to see the lie? And what do you think the first of those catastrophes might be? What's weakest to you right now?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I think I would like to think, I think we should be ready. So I think the work that we're doing now should be setting the foundations for there's a better after a crash, there's some chance, right? There's some chance that people will wake up. So we need models and ways of living and things to say there is a better way, there is a different way of actually doing this. So I think it would be very wise to prepare for that. Not to prepare so that we can survive it per se, but to prepare arguments and models that, like, if we look after, if we don't live, if we design things in a way that they're a modular design, etc., and we don't create all this waste. So kind of models of living that we can present after a crash that today people look at us and say, oh, you're just crazy. Nobody's going to do that in the process. However, the problem is if you read history and you read civilizational behavior, or you read the behavior of the leaders in civilizations, what tends to happen after crashes is that they double, treble, and quadruple down on the worst behaviors. So the civilizations, in my reading, don't tend to learn, oh, we shouldn't do that. They tend to go out in a craze of blow because unfortunately, and another thing which I didn't really touch on, but maybe I should touch on, is that when I got kind of to what I thought was the bottom cause of what really went wrong with the human species, I often found white male supremacy at the very bottom of it. And this a kind of machismo man, this last man standing type of, culture that will burn everything to the ground just to be the macho man in the process. So, I think we should be ready for, because I think we will get these multiple rolling collapses. But I, I'd be practical, but not very hopeful. I'd be, I'm a kind of a pessimist who tries to act in the process. What do I think there'll be? I think we could very quickly find food crises. I think we are really doing incredible damage to the soil, and the soil is on this strange life support system now of pesticides and phosphorus, but it's also killing it. It's killing the deep life of the soil. But it's maintaining its productivity for another 5 years or stuff like that. So it's very, very difficult to know because, we get these, we have this such an incredibly complex life system where things interact so much with each other. So it's impossible to know what will be triggers, but I certainly think, soil and water, fresh water. We have pumped so much fresh water since the 70s. We've affected the Earth's tilt, and we are literally losing water from the continents. And people think, oh, but we'll solve that with basically desalination plants. No, we won't. Every litre of fresh water from a desalination plant creates a litre and a half of toxic saline liquids. So those places in the Middle East that are very dependent on desalination, they're destroying their coastlines, or they're gradually destroying their coastlines with incredibly salinated water. So you won't solve the problem for with desalination plants, which also require infrastructure and lots of lots of fossil fuels in the process. So fresh water and soil, but who knows?
stuff to look forward to. Fred.
Well, thank you, Deb. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for bringing Mr. McGovern, and thank you for this incredible presentation. I am thinking of the grand tradition of Tracy Kidder today. This is what you remind me of. So, uh, more power to you, and thank you for all this work that you've done. So, I'd like to jump, if I could, please, to the here and now for many of us who are in the climate action here in Massachusetts and have been working at this for some time. So in Massachusetts, one of the leading states in climate progress of the 50, if not the leading state, the state came out with the decarbonization roadmap, an assemblage of 600 pages of documentation about 6 years ago that set us, meaning generally the climate movement, on a very constructive path. And what it drills down to is, if I may, is two particular questions at the point of climate impact. That is, and this is the way I think of it. There's somebody who's in Massachusetts buying a car today, an automobile for themselves, a household vehicle, and we may or may not be able to deter them from buying that vehicle and going instead to public transit or bicycles. But we may be able to say, there's the gas-powered vehicle, there's the electric vehicle. We suggest this one. So that's half of it. The other half is similar question with somebody who's in a home, in a household of any kind. Here in Massachusetts, every household is significantly heat dominated. So every household has a heating system. And at some point, that system needs replacement. They could go this direction with gas or oil, this direction with heat pump. That's where much of the climate action has been focused. And I say thanks in large part to this decarbonization roadmap, which laid out that in each of those two sectors, buildings and transportation, two-thirds of the carbon goes through those individual household decisions. So that's what we do day to day. I wonder what your thoughts might be on that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience.
No, and thank you, Fred. I think those are great points. And that would have been absolutely what I would have been promoting. And like, I installed solar panels back in 2010, heat pumps. Solar panels in Ireland is a bit optimistic, but I mean, still did it and installed heat pumps as well. So, and
I'm sorry, did I just hear optimist?
Well, Irish optimism of yeah, that the rainy old Ireland. But yeah, see, what I found, Fred, is, and this is the danger, that when people hear this, that there's a way out of this without changing our lifestyles. There's a way that we can keep going. We just need to move renewable. We just need to go green, because the language. And when I talk to people, they say, well, we don't really mean, when I talk to the technical people, we don't really mean green. But the communication that the public hears is that there's a free way, there's a environmentally free way to do this. And we just need to move here. And we can still have the big TVs. We can still have the big heating. We can still have the big house. We can still have the whole lifestyle and go green. And we can't, because it's just different. See, that's where we might even reduce carbon to some degree, but we'll wipe out entire ecosystems. Like, we are into the sixth mass extinction. We are into the sixth mass extinction. So we'll wipe out the entire Andes ecosystem. We'll wipe out most of Indonesia's ecosystem and all these ecosystems. So for the trade-off to get these, because we're only focused on one of the harms. I think, as complicated as it seems, we need to look at the total impact we have.
Right. So embodied carbon is a step in that direction.
It's one of the
step, but it's one element.
But carbon.
I'd like to think that the Environmental Protection Agency, when it was what it was supposed to be a minute ago, uh, might have been doing many of these things, but I know it has always been falling way short. As most of the people that are engaged in our networks would call themselves environmentalists, care about everything you're talking about, have a foggy idea about the harms beyond carbon. And it's totally appropriate that we all get much clearer about the devastations we're causing. But we still come down to there's consumer choices happening every day. Can we affect them? I think. Okay, that's my last.
No, I think, you know, so I go back to my first point, and I'm sure you're doing it as well. Focus on your forests, focus on your soils, focus on your water, right? If it's hurting the forests, if it's hurting the soils, it's not good. If they're cutting down the forests to build wind turbines, there's a disconnect occurring there, and focus on what environmentalists used to focus on, the critters, the first and foremost, do no harm to those, help those in every sense, and then move back to the other decisions. But unfortunately, Fred, what I've found is that the decisions of the renewable energy industry is a basic, it's like saying you can continue this lifestyle and we can't. And it has that danger inherent in it, that it hides other harms. It says, look, we wave a flag of the good thing we're doing, but we're doing all this other damage through nickel mining, through copper mining, through all sorts of other impacts, lithiums and rare earths, which are absolutely essential to wind turbines, cause about 500,000, every gigawatt of wind causes about 500,000 ton of radioactive rare earth waste. So there's all these multitudinal other harms that, yeah, we're overloaded. We can't, because we're just trying to get through our day and our week and our jobs. And it's very difficult to, have a focus on all the other harms. But all the other harms are there and they are growing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I just wanted to, and I'm not trying to be like, no, really, we're saying the same thing, or like we're all in agreement. But yeah, I appreciate that we're trying to make things easier for the consumer, but providing choice should also include providing better public transportation. And Massachusetts is by far not the only state in the union that is doing a really lousy job with that. Like, there's a ongoing fist fight between people who drive cars and people who are on bicycles, and they essentially made it a little bit easier for people on bicycles at sort of kind of the expense of drivers. But I'm kind of sitting there like, but why don't you run more buses more frequently, or run more trains, and then people can meaningfully not drive, and then we're not going to be competing with more vulnerable bicyclists. So, and yeah, okay, and I kind of had something I wanted to say about nuclear that would take a little bit longer, but kind of goes with that. But what I'm saying is, like, let's have choices. Let's improve on that map, that on the decarbonization map, with actual robust options. But okay, so I thank you so much, Gerry, for calling in. I believe it's what, 8 o'clock your time?
7.
7. Okay, all right, yeah. Well, it's time change, blah blah blah. Thank you so much, and this was really informative.